Welcome to the series Pivotal Moments, where I speak to people in all walks of life about the pivotal moments in their personal and professional lives and how they navigated them. I'm especially interested in learning how people's mindsets, motivations, and circumstances shape the choices that they made in their pivotal moments. Today, my guest is JP Gallagher. JP is the president and CEO of Endeavor Health, Chicagoland's third biggest healthcare system. And he is going to talk to us about, amongst other things, his doctrine, his model for management, and in the process, give us a sense for what it means to lead and manage a healthcare system in the state of Illinois today, 2023. Welcome, JP. Thank you for joining me.
Ram, it's great to be here. Thanks for the opportunity to have the conversation.
Yes. JP, let's start at the very beginning. How or why did you get into healthcare?
Sure. So Ram, kind of going back in time, it certainly was not anything, frankly, all that formally mapped out, right? When I think about the experiences that were most influential, healthcare was not on my radar growing up. There were no physicians or nurses in my family. I thankfully was pretty healthy, so didn't have a lot of direct experience as a patient. But what I will say that I think, having reflected on this in hindsight, was very instrumental was I was lucky to grow up in a pretty tight-knit family, and have two sisters, one older, one younger. We moved a bit because of my dad's job, and I think that kind of made us a pretty cohesive family. Actively raised Irish Catholic, and so faith and values were very prominent, or I should say, kind of front and center growing up. Just in terms of how you treat other people, kind of how you conduct yourself. I would say, sort of, even at a relatively young age, being aware that we're all part of something bigger than ourselves. And so, I think those lessons, or those influences, took root pretty early on. As I got into high school and then off to college, I don't recall, my parents ever saying, "Hey, you should go do X." That was probably a gift. But I do recall feeling a sense, and probably having a conversation about, hey, whatever you do something that's going to be of value and help more than yourself. And that could be in the private sector, it could be in the public sector. And so as I was kind of navigating my way through college, I was a history major, liberal arts. I think the only real decision I made right out of college was not to go straight to law school, which probably would have been a logical possible next step. And I thought, just kind of given that framework, that I might go into the public sector. And so I happened to find myself in a program called the Coro Fellows Program. It took me to St. Louis. I had a chance to do a variety of essentially internships in different city, state, and federal agencies, all of which were very interesting in terms of exposure, but didn't necessarily sort of trigger a light bulb to say, hey, this is something I want to do. In the course of that year, I had a couple of experiences that ended up intersecting with healthcare. So one was an experience where I worked for the city health department and was deployed into North St. Louis, which is a very underserved part of that city, and had a chance to kind of see how the public health department was trying to address a very basic public health epidemic as they were trying to tackle some issues. And I think in just a basic way, that helped me realize how fundamental healthcare is, and how access to healthcare is a major challenge for a lot of members in our country. And then in the tail end of that year in St. Louis, I did have a chance to spend 6 weeks working on a project that took me to a community hospital. And so that was showing up every day at the hospital and working with doctors and nurses. I was basically doing grant writing, but had a chance to sort of see what they did, how they worked together, and that I found very motivating. I was impressed. These were bright, intelligent people. They were, a part of the fabric of the community that they lived in. And the hospital was an important, provider of services, and also kind of an economic engine. So This was all in the early 90s. And, you and I are both old enough to remember when during the Clinton administration, healthcare reform was kind of a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would say healthcare became more of a question than anything. And so I moved to Washington, D.C., and ended up getting a job with a consulting firm that did work for hospital systems. And
Mm-hmm.
so I was essentially one of those analysts that does a lot of spreadsheets and PowerPoint presentations and staffs, different client engagements. And in the course of those 3+ years, just had a chance to interact with a lot of hospital leaders, physicians, board members, and realize just how important the work that was being done was. And so at that point, I would say healthcare was very much on my radar, even though as a non-clinician, it wasn't clear exactly what options made the most sense. And so at that point, I decided to go to graduate school, and I was pretty focused on using grad school as a way to transition into nonprofit healthcare. That was sort of what resonated with me. And I had met some, pretty remarkable, impressive people, both clinicians and non-clinicians who were in these types of organizations. So went off to graduate school and then started to proactively reach out to different health systems
Mm-hmm.
and ultimately decided to pursue essentially an administrative fellowship after grad school. And that's a little bit of the sort of the steps that ended up bringing me into this space.
Thank you, JP, for that story. I think when I reflect on my own life and when I talk to people in all walks of life, it's amazing how uh, some of our initial experiences and choices shape the rest of our lives, for better and worse. And so it's interesting how your story of faith and public service, and then subsequently your experiences in St. Louis, shaped the direction that you took. So here you are, you finished an MBA. You had been, as you said, an analyst of sorts, writing reports on healthcare. You're very interested in it. What about how did the transition to healthcare administration come about? I mean, it took some 10 plus, 15 plus years, but pretty soon you suddenly were a COO. So, how did that happen? What were some of the pivotal moments and choices? And also, when did you get the sense that you could do it?
I'm still waiting for that part, Ram. So I won't pretend to tell you there was a light bulb moment in that sense. I would say, in sort of kind of coming back to the way you frame this conversation around pivotal moments, there were probably a couple that were instrumental. And again, I first of all, I completely agree with your assessment that some of those early experiences for all of us are very foundational. And they can be positive, or they may be something that we just need to be aware of, and sometimes have an impact in ways we didn't appreciate. One of the parts of, I guess, my growing up that I still come back to is I always enjoyed being a part of teams. And so for me as a kid, that was mostly through sports and playing competitive athletics in different ways. And I was never exceptional, but I did enjoy the experience of practicing, working with other people, recognizing that everybody had different skills and abilities to bring together. And when it all went well, it was, incredibly energizing and gratifying. And so I think while I wasn't aware of that from a professional lens, I knew that experience really resonated with me. So when I was in graduate school, as you can appreciate, given your faculty experience, a lot of the paths that are available that my friends and peers were considering were investment banking, going back into strategy consulting. In our case, venture capital, private equity was starting to grow. Biotech, for those of us in healthcare, and pharma were all viable paths. And so probably the first really important decision, or maybe moment, was when I kind of came to the conclusion early on in my MBA that I wanted to go down a path that most of my peers weren't really looking at. And that was getting into nonprofit healthcare in the operational side. And I realized, having spent years in consulting, the work was stimulating, the projects were important, but I never felt vested or like I had any ownership in whether or not it worked. And I realized that I had some good mentors. I grew up in Minnesota, Twin Cities area, where healthcare is a very vibrant, healthcare delivery is very strong, and was able to talk to a couple of executives who said, at this early stage in your career, just go get experience. Go um, go get some frontline experience, ideally managing people, having some P&L responsibilities, and start to get a sense of your style and how to work effectively with other people. And so I took that to heart. And then when I found myself in a fellowship that was with a large health system here in the Chicagoland area, was lucky to be in an environment where I was able to sort of kind of roll up my sleeves and start at a pretty small scale, and definitely made mistakes. I worked under some very talented operators. One of my key mentors early on, Darcy Brazel, was the chief nursing officer at the big trauma center that I worked for at the south side of Chicago. And it was modest, but it was both a lot of fun and really valuable in terms of, how do you engage people? How do you make decisions around personnel? And how do you fire somebody? How do you train somebody or help somebody think critically around business principles that perhaps weren't part of their clinical training? So it was very hands-on. It was busy, but a lot of fun. I look very fondly back on those years and the relationships I made and what that meant. So, in terms of what happened from there, Ram, it's as some of it's luck and timing, and some of it is just working off the foundation that you have. So, I was in that environment for about 3.5 years. A mentor of mine said there's this opening at a community hospital with a different system, now North Shore, or was North Shore. And so I think that was back in 2002. I interviewed for and ended up taking an assistant hospital administrator position with North Shore in the suburbs of Chicago. And so spent the next, probably 10 years kind of in hospital operations or administration. And thankfully, as opportunities presented themselves, had the chance to ascend into different capacities, and have been lucky to stay with the same organization, even though our organization, as you know, has changed quite a bit over that time.
JP, thank you for that and for reiterating so many things that I think are very important to emphasize for younger people. Being different. You spoke about your choices at Wharton back in the mid 1990s. Going into sort of not-for-profit healthcare does not strike me as something that would have been on the top of anyone's list or many people's list growing up then. Getting experience, something else you mentioned, which is absolutely important when one is in one's 20s and 30s. You're sort of learning without even being aware about the things that you're learning. You've also spoken about the role of mentors. I think that's also very important. Many people never have one and probably feel that loss afterwards, that no one was there to tell them many things. So it's very instructive that you mentioned these three things. I want to turn my attention now to healthcare itself. JP, I'd like to say that when I joined the board of trustees at Edward Elmhurst Healthcare 7.5 years ago, and then subsequently Endeavor Health, I'd like to say that when I started, I felt like I was in kindergarten. I literally couldn't understand 80% of what was said in any meeting, or maybe even more than that. And now I feel like I'm in third grade. Sort of improved a little bit, but healthcare is a very complex beast. What I'd like you to do is, as best as you can, give our viewers a sense for the business of healthcare providers like Endeavor Health. In particular, what I'm interested in is sort of the economic, organizational, and managerial challenges of running a business like a not-for-profit healthcare system. So, as broadly as you can, how would you describe that today?
Sure. So Ram, it's a huge question, and I'll tackle it as best I can, and then maybe we go deeper on certain aspects of this based on what you think is interesting. And just for the record, if you're in third grade, given someone of your aptitude and the good questions you ask around the board table, then I'm maybe seventh grade. So let's keep that calibrated there. So healthcare is obviously a massive industry globally and certainly in the United States, and healthcare delivery. And so through that lens, I'm thinking of the actual delivery of healthcare services, whether that's in a hospital, a doctor's office, or increasingly virtually or through other channels. But we're sort of talking about the treatment of individuals in ways that are navigating whether it's wellness and keeping people healthy, or often, as is the case in the United States, episodic care when something comes up, someone's not feeling well, or there's an emergent issue. So it's obviously a very broad spectrum of things there. But healthcare delivery, which is the space I know best, I think it's fair to say in the United States is very fragmented. There's a sort of a fundamental difference in the way healthcare is organized in the U.S. than many other parts of the country, and that it is reimbursed or paid for largely through separate means, whether that's commercial insurance through, in many cases, an employer, or through government-sponsored programs like Medicare and Medicaid, depending on individuals' qualification for those programs. And so you have the funding for those services coming through a separate mechanism than the individual who is often receiving the services, and in many cases trying to make decisions about where and how to access those services. And we could probably talk for hours about the shortcomings and the strengths of that in terms of trying to put consumers in the strongest position possible. But be that as it may, I think at its core, and part of what draws me and many of the people I work with and are drawn in this industry, is it is fundamentally an intensely personal, I say calling, not job, because it is both a privilege and a responsibility in terms of when people turn to you or invest in a relationship with you because they trust you, and because one, they perhaps ideally are hoping to stay healthy and well and feel that you're a valuable resource and an important part of what they need and their community counts on. Or on the other end of the spectrum, when the stakes are incredibly high and life is in the balance, you are available, reliable, and able to navigate incredibly difficult, life-threatening situations. And we see all of that every day. And so, I would say in terms of how it works, and maybe you can guide me with some of your questions. I view our responsibility as we need to run a vibrant, healthy system that is, one, first and foremost, attracting outstanding people, particularly nurses, doctors, the people who those patients turn to. And there are a lot of other team members outside of the specific clinicians, all of whom make that happen, ideally smoothly, reliably, and in a very safe, effective manner. And as there's a lot of systems and processes and tools that go into making that work behind the scenes. But at the end of the day, what really matters is, what does the patient feel? And that may be, when they're calling to schedule the appointment or online trying to navigate some things. And it certainly is the case when they're in the doctor's office or in the ER trying to sort through potentially confusing issues. So I think it starts with people, but then it involves, investing in the processes and the tools. IT, electronic medical records and access to data is incredibly important in the way that works. We can all appreciate over the last several years following the pandemic, supply chain is incredibly important in terms of having equipment available and keeping caregivers safe. And there's a whole, aspect of our work and industry that relies on how to manage that supply chain effectively. IT, technology, cybersecurity, these are responsibilities we have. Our patients are counting on us to both take care of them, but also protect their information. So there's a lot of investment that goes into that. And then we obviously engage with the other major stakeholders. So insurers, the state and federal government, as we take care of members enrolled in those programs. And we certainly work with pharmaceutical companies, suppliers, technology firms that are interested in advancing and in some cases disrupting the way services are provided today. So we're fortunate to be in a position where we intersect with a lot of those dimensions. Sometimes there's competitive pressures in those spaces. Sometimes it's very complementary, and you have some strong partnerships. But there's a lot there, and happy to delve deeper into any of it.
JP, what you give me a sense of as someone who's listening to you is how much varied kinds of information and knowledge one needs to have to be a CEO, to be a leader of a healthcare system. That part I've understood being on the board, but you've sort of summarized this beautifully. I want to now turn to Endeavor Health. I am particularly interested in something you've spoken about at our board meetings and you've written about the high performance organization. Can you tell us a little bit about what, in your view, a high performance healthcare system is? And then tell us a little bit about how you think, you as a CEO, and how you act to create a high performance healthcare system.
Sure. Happy to, Ram. And again, a very rich conversation with lots of aspects to it. First, and I think you and I have mentioned this, I view healthcare really as a team sport, right? There's not, so I appreciate the question as it relates to how do I in this role think about, my responsibility and supporting, a lot of what we do, but also important to, be the first to recognize there's very little that I do directly that is what makes the experiences of the tens of thousands of patients we touch on any given day go well. That said, I think I do very intentionally think about the journey we are on as an organization as becoming a high performing organization in a way that is consistent, reliable, and always improving. And as we talked about, the recent name change in our brand Endeavor is in part, I think, reinforcing this notion of this is a mentality around continuing to improve and be ambitious in the goals that we set for ourselves. So when I think about a high performing organization, I come back to earlier point we touched on, which is people. At the end of the day, I mean, again, healthcare delivery, perhaps more than a lot of other industries, it fundamentally comes back down to people. And so how do you attract and then also, very importantly, retain and develop the team members that are a part of your organization? And as in our case, we have 27,000 team members, very diverse, rich range of experiences, perspectives, and demographics. How do we draw upon that as a strength? How do we engage our team members in a way that they feel that they can sort of show up and be who they are, but also feel supported and valued. And there are aspects of that I think we do very well, and there are aspects of that we clearly have room to improve and are focused and committed on doing that. So it has a lot to do with people, and not just kind of getting them into the organization. It is kind of coaching, developing, investing in them. Certainly from an employer perspective, obviously, compensation, benefits, the investments that they feel are critical. But that's really one dimension of many. The other is, what's the environment and what are your values? We were, as very intentional as our system has grown over the last couple of years in explicitly developing values that we felt reflected who we are, how we intend to show up, and what we aspire to be. And we talk about those very explicitly and try to reinforce those in both our actions as well as our words. And then it's important. I mean, we should be held accountable for are we living those values as an organization? So there's a lot that goes into that, and then you get into tools and processes. From a HR perspective, how are we communicating with our team members? How are we addressing issues when they come up? And I'll say, because my leadership team and I were just talking about this last week. I think in particular, your frontline leaders, right? Some people call them middle management, but these are the individuals who are the linchpins, and in many cases, the glue of what happens on any given day across the entire enterprise, whether that's in a clinical setting or a system support service function. These are the people who are making things work. They're answering questions. They're troubleshooting issues as they come up. And so how are we investing in those leaders who are, in many cases, often carrying the heaviest load of trying to help the organization move in a certain direction, but working through things, in real time, in a way that is manageable. And so those are some of the things that come most to mind, Ram, in terms of what a strong organization is doing.
Yes, thank you for that, JP. I mean, I appreciate the point you made about healthcare being a team sport. I appreciate that point very much. It is, in fact, something I thought of and I'm thinking of as I am writing a book And I am thinking of Endeavor Health in particular because of the complexity of healthcare. But I should also add, advantage also starts from the top, the person at the top. You've got to believe that the person at the top leaves his or her mark for better or worse and moves an organization towards something better. Um, I know you're a very modest guy, but tell me as best as you can when you reflect on what it is you do, what is it that you think you are doing to lead Endeavor Health in this direction where team flourishes? I asked this question because there was this, I know JP, you're a sports guy. People used to say anybody could have managed Barcelona 2008 through 2012. Well, I don't think so. Yes, they had great stars, but it took the right guy to do it. So, in much the same way, I think you are leaving an imprint on this organization. Now, you probably have some idea about what you're doing, what impression you're leaving on people, and how you are directing them to, in their own way, find solutions to problems. How would you describe what you do? If I can put the onus back on you.
Yeah. So Ram, it's a really important question, and I think it is one that I think a lot about and do put a lot of time into. So I think in a role like this, the most significant responsibility I have is to my team, and how am I supporting and setting my team members up for success. And kind of going back to your earlier question of high performing organizations, you can't get anywhere if you don't have talented people throughout the organization, but certainly in senior leadership roles, because as I say, and as I've had mentors say to me, I never want to be the smartest person in the room, right? I want to be in an organization that is attracting the kind of talent where it kind of reinforces itself, right? We're pushing ourselves, we're getting better, we're challenging certain assumptions, we are, not getting complacent, and that only happens if you have, I think, very motivated, driven people, but who also share your values and can work well in team settings. And those two don't always go hand in hand. You and I both know there are plenty of sports analogies of, exceptionally talented individuals who just don't fit well within a certain system. So
Yeah.
I would say I am very intentional about individuals that I'm hiring into certainly my direct reports, executive leadership team. Just I guess as a little bit of an example, if I'm interviewing someone who I'm seriously considering for a role that's going to be playing a instrumental role, my first interview usually lasts between 2 and 3 hours with that person.
Okay.
And it's more a conversation than it is an interview, right? I mean, the substance of the skills and the qualifications, that stuff's all pretty easy to suss out, right? I mean, you kind of get a sense of what experiences they've had. If you do your job and do references, you can generally find some insights as to what's worked and lessons learned along the way. But a couple of things that I focus on is one is self-awareness. I think any effective leader has to have a good understanding of where they've come from, how they've gotten there, and most importantly, what are their strengths and what are their shortcomings. And we all have them. I absolutely do myself. And so through the course of conversations, you get a sense of how self-aware is this person, what are their strengths as a leader. And they're very respectful conversations. It is a conversation. I'm sharing as much as I'm asking in these settings. But if I'm in a situation where someone is kind of just talking in platitudes or sound bites, or sort of just kind of highlighting the resume, that's a big warning sign for me, because so much of what makes us effective as an organization is how is this person going to handle high stakes situations that I have no idea about, and nor should I, right? So if you're a C-suite leader, you've got to make judgment calls, you got to develop your own teams, and so I'm often trying to figure out, does this person have the values, the instincts, and the experiences to draw from that will help them in these situations that I don't want them coming back to me time after time saying, is this okay? And it's not a one-time conversation, but that is an important step in the process for me, is what do my instincts tell me in that conversation? And then I'm obviously getting, points of view from lots of other people who I trust and respect. I'm not doing this in a vacuum, again, in a team setting like ours that doesn't work. And so, once that individual, if they join the organization, I do try to spend a lot of time with them, and be as available as they want. I certainly try not to micromanage and be a sounding board if it's helpful, but more just kind of checking in, seeing how they're doing, and then as they're evolving, helping them connect with other people within the organization, building relationships, getting acclimated. And then as it comes to the team dynamic, a big part of this is getting to a place of trust. And that you can't force that, and it doesn't happen quickly. I will say that in the face of real challenges, it sometimes accelerates. So for us, navigating the COVID pandemic was one of those moments where it was an existential crisis. And my team, I say this when I talk to young people. It's a part of my career that I hope we never experience again. In the intensity of what happened in 2020, it is also probably going to be one of the proudest moments of my career when I think about how our team rallied, the lives we saved, the creative solutions we found in the face of really challenging situations. And it absolutely strengthened our team. I think really stressful situations either bring a team together or they break it, depending on what may not have been in place going into that circumstance. But on the trust side, I actively try to find ways in which to deepen that familiarity, and you got to be careful and respectful in how you do it. But in our case, we spent some time offsite, and this was 2 years into our journey as a new executive team. But having some conversations about some stuff that it wasn't directly work related, but it was a lot about learning about each other, respecting where we're coming from, maybe sharing some experiences that were tough. But I think strengthen that appreciation for who each of us is. And that I have found to be foundational but accretive in terms of how a team gets comfortable enough to take risks, to be able to challenge each other, to recognize when things don't go well. It's not personal. And so that's a bit of, I guess, how I look and approach it.
JP, thank you for that. For me, if I were to summarize what you just told me, temperament and character count as much as intelligence.
Yeah.
And that is sort of what you're trying to gauge in your conversations. Let me switch a little bit, but staying with you, meaning with your role as a CEO. One of the questions that I think is of great interest is, how does a person improve as a CEO? What are you thinking and acting? In the last few years, there's been a lot of interest, JP, in this idea of time use. That is, what exactly does a CEO do? So I want to just ask you questions about how you allocate your time. Alone time, for example, reflection, digestion of everything that happens around you, synthesis, planned versus spontaneous meetings with people. One-on-one meetings versus group meetings, meetings with stakeholders. I'm sure you do all of this, but how do you think and act as you navigate these things as a CEO?
Yeah. Another good question, Ram. So I would say for me, this is, very candidly, still a work in progress in terms of, I'll say, time management. That said, there certainly are habits that I find valuable and important. But I've been in a CEO role now for 7 years, and it's still very much a journey. But I'll start with this. I think it's really critical when you're in a role like this that you are visible and accessible, right? And again, our line of work is very people dependent. It happens in a lot of different locations, and so I think it's important to get out. And so, at least once a week, I try to be at one of our sites. Some of it is scheduled, and some of it is I just drop by, and wander the halls and try to have conversations with people and get a sense of how things are going. It's nothing too formulaic, but it is a sense of, hey, what's working, what's not working, what's frustrating you. Part of it is for me, one way of taking the temperature and getting a sense of how our team members doing. And part of it is, just trying to listen, be supportive, and if possible, follow up on some things that I might be in a position to help address. So that's one aspect. And candidly, that is the most energizing part of this job is seeing what we're doing and being there firsthand and frankly in many ways often learning from our team members who are willing to share that stuff. So for any leader in any organization, it's not rocket science, but it is really important to make that a priority, because the other aspects of the job can fill up your inbox, they can consume your schedule, you can spend a lot of time on the road representing the organization. Those are all relevant responsibilities, but at the core, our responsibility to our people comes out of how strong is that connection, and I need that connection not to be dependent just on my direct reports and what's getting filtered to me. So that's one aspect of the job. I have gotten more rigorous in managing my schedule. I mean, a lot of my calendar is mapped out a year in advance by necessity, and including spontaneous time, right? So blocks of time where either I am carving out time for me to think and reflect and try to minimize interruptions, as well as possibly shoot off to another site and location to spend some time out in the field. But I have to be intentional about that. I rarely wake up today and be like, hey, I'm going to try to make this happen.
Yeah.
On the personal side, maintaining energy, these jobs, they're pretty intense. They tend to, there's a 24/7 aspect to this job, but you have to be able to turn it off. I'm fortunate to have a very supportive spouse, and, a loving wife who, was a corporate professional for many, many years. And, now is, been focused on helping us, raise our 3 teenage kids. But those relationships and time with my family is essential. So I have to be able to compartmentalize and both make that happen, but also be present when that's the case. And sometimes I fall short of that, but that's certainly the goal. And then things as basic as sleep, reflection and exercise. For me, trying to make sure I get enough rest. First thing I do, I get up in the morning and I do kind of a 10-minute mindfulness exercise, stretch for a little bit, and then I work out. And that's usually pretty early in the morning, but that's just kind of how I get the day started. It's a routine that helps. It's also, when a day may blow up on you and there's a lot of stuff you can't control, it helps to sort of start it consistently. So those are a few things that come to mind.
I'm going to come to many of these personal things in our last round, JP, including your family and how you spend your time.
Yeah.
Let me sort of have one more question before we get to this last round of short questions. Something that I've been thinking of for a long time. I don't have the answers, but just again, as a sort of quasi outsider, I think about this. How does a not-for-profit healthcare system like Endeavor fulfill its obligations to the community, however you see these obligations, without going bankrupt or without being under great financial stress? Because we all read about the enormous pressure on not-for-profit healthcare systems throughout the country. I'm sure you've thought a lot about that. Can you share with us what you think needs to happen? How does a CEO of any healthcare system manage this? Yeah. And what does it take by way of regulation or policies to make this task easier?
Yeah, so a very timely question, Ram, and there's many aspects to, I think, what you just articulated. So let me start with the fundamental premise, and that is, as a nonprofit system, and I've been in this space most of my entire career, that comes with an obligation that the impact and the services you are providing merit and ideally more than justify the financial benefit of being tax exempt. And as you are aware, and I think anyone who's paying attention, appreciates, there's a lot of debate in the country right now, and there's a lot of frustration. I think people feel vulnerable. Navigating the healthcare system is, I think, on the heels of the pandemic, has been perhaps far more challenging than it was 6, 7 years ago. And there are some pretty painful examples of people who have been left in the lurch, or are carrying a huge medical balance that presents a real financial challenge to them or their families. So these are responsibilities we have to accept and recognize. Now, that said, our responsibility is to make sure that the services we provide are of high quality and they are accessible.
Yes.
And we can't do that naively and just sort of saying, okay, come on in and we'll take care of you. We have to be very intentional about how we organize ourselves in an environment where reimbursements, frankly, have not kept up with the inflation of labor and supplies and all the other market forces that are part of the reality of running a large organization. And yet we have to do that fiscally responsibly, or we're not going to be able to invest in our people. I mean, last year, as you know, at Endeavor Health, we invested over $165 million in our 27,000 team members, between merit pay, market adjustments to stay competitive, or investments in retirement accounts. And that those are the first dollars we spend, are into our people, so that they're available for the care that people need. That said, we can't stand still, and we have to keep adapting and evolving, which means services may look and feel and be available in a different way than they were 3 years ago, because it can either be done more efficiently, or concentrating particular expertise in a given location leads to better outcomes. There are digital tools that perhaps open up access. So we are constantly pushing ourselves in ways to do things, both in a way that's patient friendly, but also more cost effective, because that reality is not going away. Another key part of what I think you're asking about, Ram, is I think transparency is both very important and something we should hold ourselves accountable to. Mm-hmm. So, when it comes to reporting on, how much charity care, how much community benefit, what are the other aspects of your mission that are directly beneficial to the community, we should be very, upfront about how we are living that commitment. And as one aspect of that for us is our community investment fund. We invest about $10 to $11 million a year in partnerships with outside organizations where we're tackling social determinants of health, whether that's food insecurity, homelessness, domestic violence. These are all, really important dimensions of what's going on in our communities that many of our patients are having to deal with. Mm-hmm. And yes, we have a space within healthcare delivery, but those other aspects of life are very much impacting someone's ability to stay healthy. So we have much more proactively stepped into that space. As you know, Swedish Hospitals, a safety net hospital, serves a very vital, diverse, underserved in many ways community. And so we're proud of that, and we're investing in that. So there are a lot of aspects to it, but I would say one is being very clear and transparent about the value and impact, and also navigating the pressures that come with the environment we're in, and inflation and all those realities is a responsibility you also have to tackle unapologetically.
Yes. Well, thank you, JP. Now we're going to get to our rapid fire round, or what we might call Ask JP Anything. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you A or B, and you're going to choose, and maybe we have a minute or so to just talk about that, and then we'll move on. So my first question is actually first two actually, but my first question in particular tests your loyalty. So Princeton or Penn?
Have to go undergrad. When it comes to sports, it's always Princeton.
Okay. And where do you think your children are going to go and study?
I hope wherever they want, and whatever place is frankly a good fit. Our oldest daughter will be a freshman at Davidson College in North Carolina. We're thrilled for her. Our twins are sophomores in high school, so they got some time, but I'm just excited to see what path they want to follow. Excellent.
Thank you. Yes, most people do choose their undergrad schools. My second question, now this is going to test you. The Vikings or the Bears?
Oh, that one's not hard. It's Vikings. am a Chicagoan now by marriage and career, but I grew up in Minnesota. I think I was Fran Tarkington for Halloween for like 3 years in a row. And when your team's 0 for 4 in the Super Bowl, it builds character. So no, I am always wearing purple on Sunday.
Yes. Well, Minnesota is one of those teams. I'm not a die-hard NFL fan. Probably followed it a lot more years ago than I do today. But Minnesota is always one of those teams that you never know which one you're going to get.
Yeah.
And so I can imagine the frustration, probably on par with the Bears fan.
We probably do share some similar experiences there.
Yes. Now, JP, I heard from some of my fellow trustee members that you are an avid tennis fan. And actually, Harry Kramer told me you're a very good tennis player. So let me test you on this. Federer or Nadal?
Ooh, that's a tough one. Tremendous respect for both of them. Phenomenal athletes and competitors. I'd say Federer.
Who's your all-time favorite tennis player?
Yeah. I all time, I would say Andre Agassi. Not so much for his. I mean, his game is good, and he was a prominent player when I was growing up. But I think his personal story, kind of the way he matured as an individual, the work that he's done after his career, helping other people, it to me is a really compelling example of someone who's grown into themselves. So that's more than what you were asking. But as someone whose career evolved in a way that I was impressed with, I'd say Agassi.
So, JP, what's your killer shot?
My backhand was something that kind of got me through a number of matches. I'm ambidextrous, so that might have something to do with it. But probably my willingness to grind is I never had any great weapons and was never that strong, but I didn't mind slugging it out for 3 hours on the court, so that might have helped.
Yes, that's a bit like Djokovic today, or Connors back in the day, just never gave up. Good to know. So, my next question is actually going to be on cuisine. Italian or Mexican?
Oh, I'm both good. Hard to choose. I'll probably go Italian. I just, fresh pasta and caprese and something light but tasty is hard to pass up. But I'm a sucker for a good taco too. So, but I'll take Italian on that one.
And what's your favorite cuisine?
Sushi. Love fresh fish, and if there's a couple spots that I consistently take advantage of. But yeah, sushi would be at the top of the list.
That's good to know. My next question is on dessert. Death by chocolate or Haagen-Dazs ice cream?
Oh, that's easy. For me, it's ice cream, Haagen-Dazs or otherwise. But straight chocolate ice cream in my old age is the taste that I have come back to most of all. So I keep it simple, but that is a weak spot.
Okay, good to know. So that is your favorite dessert?
Yeah, I mean, I do not pass up chocolate ice cream.
Okay, good to know. Next, a question about where you would go on a holiday. Paris or Hawaii?
I'd have to say Paris. My wife lived abroad before I knew her. Berlin's probably her favorite city in the world. But so spending time with her in a European city is one of her happy places. So in that case, it would be Paris.
Okay, good to know. My next question actually gets to de-stressing. Yoga or an ice bath?
So I don't have much experience with yoga. Ice bath. I actually do take cold showers, so that's the closest I come. But the last couple of years have found that to be, I'll say, energizing, and I think there's some health benefit to it. So I'm probably more on that end of the spectrum.
So, what is your idea of de-stressing?
Really, time with family first and foremost. When I'm able to get home and sort of just turn it off. Weekends with the kids, being outside ideally is sort of the perfect combination. But time with people that I love, and frankly, doing some things that allow me to just be a dad or a husband is for me incredibly relaxing and grounding.
Okay. My next question has to again do with your tastes and preferences. Genre of movies, rom-com or horror?
Huh. Candidly, don't really care about either. Documentaries and drama probably more up my alley, or action. But if rom-com or horror, I guess I'll go rom-com.
Okay. What's the last one you saw? Do you remember?
God, it was probably what's that holiday Christmas movie? I can't remember the title with Hugh Grant.
It's okay.
I think we watched that as a family.
Okay, that's good. Um, Musical taste, Beyonce or Taylor Swift?
Oh, I'd have to go. I have two daughters who are big Swifties, so Taylor Swift.
Okay, I thought so. Um, Perhaps that's the music that goes in your car when you get in. Um,
It
is that
it, it
right?
absolutely does get played sometimes. Yep.
Yeah, yes. And sort of ending, what's your idea of a romantic evening? A night at the opera or dancing?
Huh. I would say dancing, but candidly, a good glass of wine with my wife and no interruptions qualifies as romantic at this stage of life. So either would be enjoyable, but I'll go with dancing if we get the chance.
JP, thank you so much for spending the last hour with me, sharing a lot about your personal life, your story of how you came to lead Endeavor Health, your thoughts on the art and science of management. This has been incredibly insightful for me, and I'm sure will be for many, many people. And I imagine all 15,000 or whatever number of Endeavor Health employees would be keen to learn about your tastes and preferences on just about everything. But thank you so much, JP, for spending this hour with me. Okay.
Well, Ram, thank you. Enjoyed the conversation and appreciate the invitation to join you. So thank you.
Yes. Thank you.
Take care.